At some point in a developer's life, they're going to want to create a website, and there are so many different ways to do that. It is absolutely unreal. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do it in Flask. This is perfect for people that already have a Python backend and don't necessarily want to stray away from that. Flask is a good one to get started with, as it doesn't really require a huge amount of background knowledge, and it's very quick to just get a website up and running. Which is why I'm showing you this. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create an authentication system, kind of in the way that Flask recommends you do it, so you can just build upon it. The reason I'm showing you an auth system is that it basically shows you pretty much everything you need to know, or at least all the basics. It shows you all the basics of everything you need to know in how to create a Flask website. So it's quite a good thing to go over. Plus, that will probably take long enough as it is. I did say it was quick, but there is still quite a lot to go over. But before we talk about that, let me talk to you about Tidio. Tidio is a customer relationship management tool which lets you increase sales, collect leads, and provide excellent customer service. Even if you're not selling anything, Tidio can help to provide answers to questions your visitors may have, or even assist those who just want to leave some feedback. Tidio provides a combination of live and automated support based on your needs. You can create chatbots to send programmable automated responses, so even if you're a small business without a budget for a support team, or if you just want some help offloading answering some of the more frequently asked questions, Tidio has you covered. The chatbots can be created with pretty advanced triggers too, such as on specific days and specific times, the detection of a returning customer, and when the user's cart has been abandoned. Installing it on your website is as easy as copy-pasting one line of JavaScript code, or installing the Tidio plugin on sites like Shopify, WordPress, and Magneto. Once installed, you can customize the appearance to your liking, including custom branding, widget positioning, and language preferences. To start connected to your customers today, head to tidio.com/get/Carberra, that's also in the description, to get started with Tidio for free. So long as you use the link, you'll also get 20% off a premium plan when you upgrade, so be sure not to miss out. That's tidio.com/get/Carberra to get started for free, then 20% off a premium plan with Tidio. So before we get started, I'm just going to direct your attention to the sidebar for a bit to show you the files that I've already got here. This Python version you don't need to worry about, this is just a PyM thing. But I do already have a CSS file and some HTML files. I'll be showing these in more detail when we're actually talking about them, but you can download these directly. I've got them hosted on a file server, so you can download them using the links in the description. It's just easier because HTML isn't really the focus of this video, but we do kind of need to have these things in place. So I'll show them when they're necessary, but I won't go into them in too much detail. So to create an app, all you need to do is create a folder. I've called mine app. You can call yours whatever you want. And we need to put a dunder init.py file into it. And then we need to install Flask, because I've just realized I haven't done that yet. So to do that, we just do pip install Flask, and this is all you're going to need. It will install quite a lot of dependencies, so you can see click is one, and I'm not sure how you pronounce this, Werkzeug. That looks quite a German word to me, but I don't know. But that is going to be used quite a bit as well. So it kind of installs everything you need to use, which is quite nice. Or at least everything we need to do with this. So to start, we do from pathlib import path, and then from Flask import Flask. And then we're going to create a function called create app. And we're going to have a single keyword argument, test config equals none. So this is, if you're running this in a test environment, you may want to pass a test configuration through. We're not going to be doing that in this. We're not really going to be worrying about configs too much. But it's nice to have. We do app equals Flask, and then we need to give it a name. So we're going to give it the file name, and we're going to say instance relative config equals true. And this basically just means that any config files will be placed in the instance directory, which is a special directory that Flask will create the first time you run the application. That is designed not to be committed. So you just put everything in there, and this will contain the database and all that as well. As I said, we're not really going to be worrying about configuration files, but this is where you would put your configuration file if you had one. So now we're going to create an instance, path, path equals, and this is just going to be a pathlib object of our app.instance path. If you don't want to use pathlib, you can use OS, but I do like my pathlib. And we're going to make sure that it exists. And if it doesn't, we're going to create it. And then we're going to do app.config.from mapping, and we are going to create a few keys. The first of which is going to be a secret key, which for the now we're just going to set to dev. And we're also going to have a DB path, which is our instance path /app dot SQLite. And we're just going to use an SQLite database for this. You can use other databases, but it's just easier to start with this. And we're going to say if we have provided a test config, then we want to overwrite the default config, or any default config keys, with the ones we passed in. Otherwise, we want to load, where possible, a config from a Python file called config.py silent equals true. This silent equals true basically means that if it doesn't exist, then it won't complain at you, which in our case it doesn't. You only need to do this kind of once you're in production and you have your secret key, you put that in there, but the DB path is always going to be the same. Now we just need to create an index page, so we can do that using the app.root decorator. And this is how you create any page. You create a root, and we're just going to set it to be the index. And we're not going to bother giving it a name because we don't need to. And then we're just going to make it return hello world just for the sake of it existing. And then we just need to return the app, and we're pretty much done in creating the app itself. So we can move on to creating the database. Now I'm going to start with the schema.sql file, and we're going to do drop table if exists user. So the way we're going to run this, this will only be run when we want to reset the database completely. And then we're going to create table user. Inside that table, we're going to have an ID, which is going to be an integer, which is going to be a primary key, which is also going to auto increment. You may want to use UUIDs in production, or maybe like hex IDs or something like that, just for the sake of security. But for now, we're just doing it like this. And we're going to have a username, text unique, not null, and a password. That's going to be text not null. And we don't want that trailing comma actually. If you do get an error saying there's something wrong around here, you've probably put a trailing comma in. SQL really doesn't like those. So now we have our schema in place. We can create a new DB, and we're not focused in because of course macOS. Bloody hell. Create a new db.py file, and we can import SQLite 3. And we can import click, and we are using the right env, nice. And from Flask equals current app G. Now this G is sort of like a global store in a way. It doesn't really mention global in the documentation at all, but I kind of see it as a global store. And current app will be the current app at the time of the request. So these Flask uses a lot of magic to do all its stuff, and all these current app and G. These are all objects that kind of magically update themselves. I don't really know how that works behind the scenes, but it does. It works. So who am I to complain? So we're going to have a function here called getDB, and we're going to call this from outside this quite a lot. We're going to say if DB not in G, then we don't have a DB, therefore we need to create one. So g.db equals SQLite3.connect, and we're going to have current app.config, and we want to connect to our DB path. And then we also, for convenience sake, want to set g.db.row factory equals SQLite3.row. And this will allow us to access rows in dictionaries. So normally SQLite3 will return it as a tuple. With this, we can access it like a dictionary, which is quite nice. But if you use dict there, it doesn't work. So just keep that in mind. And then we're going to return g.db out of it. We're also going to have a function to close the DB, and we're going to, it takes an exception, which defaults to none. We're not going to deal with that right now, but it does take one in case you did want to use it. And we're going to pop the DB from G and assign it to a variable called DB. This is what the walrus operator is doing. And we're going to db.close. And then we want a click command to initialize the DB. And we're going to call this init DB. Do init, whoopsie daisies, init DB command. DB equals get DB. And then with current app dot open resource schema.sql. So we're loading in our SQL file, and this will always load it in as a bytes file. So do keep that in mind. db.execute script f.read.decode UTF-8. This is what I was saying. So we need to decode it when we load it because it loads it in as a byte. So I don't think there's a way around that. Oh, there you go. You can set the mode if you want, but okay, we're just going to leave it as default because why not? And then we want to def init app dot tear down app context close db, and I'll talk about that in a second. app.cli.add command init db command. Now I'm going to spend some time explaining all this, so feel free to catch up if you are copying at home. So this click.command init.db, this is what we're going to use to create our database. So we're not going to rely on the first instantiation of the app or whatever to do it. We're just going to create it ourselves using this command. So we get the DB and then we open the schema SQL, as I said. This is why we have the drop table if it exists, because when we run the command, we want to completely reset the database and start it from scratch. So that's what we're doing there. In this init app, we're going to be calling this from somewhere else. So we're setting close DB to be called whenever the app tears down. So when the app is being closed, we're registering the close DB function to be called when that happens, which is why this takes an exe, because that will be passed by this. But this is basically just saying that when we close the app, we also want to close the database. And we're also adding a CLI command, which is this function here. So now we can run this directly from the Flask command line, which is quite nice. So we can do that now, actually. So we can do Flask, and I'm actually going to clear the terminal. Flask, see if I remember how to do this. I think it's app double dash. No, it's a double dash. It's double dash app, then init db. No, that's not how I did it at all. Oh no, because I haven't added the command. There's a step I've missed. That is my fault. So remember when I said we were going to do something a little bit later on? This is where we're doing it. So if you come down here, so between our root, I suppose it doesn't really matter exactly where you do it. I do from dot import db and then db.init app. And now it will work. So if you do this, then as you can see, we have this instance directory and we have this app.sqlite in here. Now using my extension, we can see that we have this user. I forget what this extension is called exactly. I think it's just called SQLite Viewer. You can see we have the ID, the username, and the password, but we don't have any records because no one's created an account yet. But you can see that it does exist, and this is just a helper table for SQLite to do all its stuff, mainly for the auto increment, I think, because it needs to keep track of where it last was. So now that we've done that, we can actually start creating our first view. Actually, you know what? I'll show it running, because we can do that. So if we replace initdb with run, now we get this run, and if we go to here, and I don't know where that's going to open, it's going to open across. Cool. You can see, it might just be able to see, let me zoom in a decent amount there. You can see it says hello world, and we have our website and it's all loaded and it's all fantastical and magical. But now we're going to create our first proper view. And to do that, we need to create a new file, and we're going to call this one auth.py. And we need to import quite a lot into this one. So from functools import wraps, and then from Flask import, and get ready for this, blueprint, flash, G, redirect, render template, request, session, oh, not that, session, and URL for. You can, of course, just import Flask if you really want to, but we're doing it in the way that Flask tends to do it in its documentation. And then from Werkzeug, someone please tell me how to pronounce that before I offend anyone else. .security, import, check password hash, and generate password hash. You can probably see how those are going to be being used. And then also we need to do from app.db, import get db. So this is our first time that we're actually having to get the DB from the app. And now we need to create a blueprint. So BP equals blueprint. We give the blueprint a name. We give it an import name. So we just passed done the name. And we give it a URL prefix, an optional URL prefix, but we are doing it in this instance. And we give it /auth. So a blueprint is sort of like a sub app. So you can create routes onto a blueprint in the same way that you could an app. And it will use this URL prefix automatically, and you can have, you know, blueprint elements, all sorts. So it's sort of like a sub app in a way. Or if you've built Discord bots before, it's kind of like a cog or a plugin or something like that. It essentially just plugs into the main app, so it can help with, you know, structuring the code, so you don't have it like all in one file or something like that, or you don't have to import everything from everywhere, even though we kind of are, but that's beside the point. And it also means we can do something like this. So if we register a route called register, this will now be triggered if we go to auth/register, not just register. So it's taken this URL prefix /auth, and then we have the register in that, which is quite nice. And in this method, we need to provide a series of methods. So we're going to provide get, and we're going to provide post. We're going to do def register, and we don't need to pass anything in. And I'm going to do the get first. So if it's just a get request, and all we need to do is return and render template auth/register.html. We're going to come back to that template once I've written the rest of the function, because it will probably make a little bit more sense at that point. But if we're doing it, I just realized I spelled register wrong. If we're doing just a get, then all we want to do is render the web page. However, if we are doing a post, that means someone has queried this page and has attempted to create a user for themselves. So we need to add them into the database. So we can do db equals get db, and after that we can get the username equals the request.form, and then username, and then the password, which equals the request.form password, and then our error equals none for now. After that, we can check if our username, or I suppose if not username, that means no one. That means the person didn't provide a username. So we can set the error to be username is required. Elif, it'll be an elif, not password. The error equals password is required. And then if there's no error at this stage, that means that everything has gone fine so far. So we can try and insert the user into the database. So we can do a db.execute, insert into user, username, password, values, and then we're going to use our prepared statement syntax. And then we want to pass in username, and we want to generate a password hash for the password. So we don't want to store the password in plain text, because that's incredibly insecure. So we can generate a password hash, meaning we store the hash. Now with a hash, it's one way. So we can generate a hash for the password. You can't get the password from the hash, which is why we do it in a hash. And then we can do db.commit to commit them in. And then we can return, if everything goes okay, we can return a redirect URL for auth.login. And I'm just going to do an accept pass for now, just so Black can sort that out. Thank you. So this redirect URL for auth.login, we haven't actually created an auth.login route yet, but if we say had login here, then this auth.login would be able to find that route. So you don't need to provide a URL, meaning the URL can change as many times as you like, but so long as the function name remains the same, then it will be good. It's just a much nicer way of doing it than hard coding everything. But except if we run into an integrity error, then the user, a user of said username, and we're gonna do -r so we get quotes, is already taken. Please try another. Very common. And the end of everything, if there was an error, then we need to then flash any errors with the category of error. So this flash kind of flashes a message into session storage for the next request to pick up, or any future request beyond that. So a flash store has to be manually cleared, but it's essentially just stores messages in place. So if you have like alerts or something, then you can put them in here. And then we rendered a template. Anyway, so if we then move on to our login, which is kind of very much the same thing. So we now have a bp.root /login. And then we have methods equals get and then post again. And it is largely the same stuff. So I might copy paste some of it. Yeah, we'll try copy pasting it just for the sake of time. And then we'll change the things we need to change. So I need to zoom this out a bit just so I can see what I'm doing. We would actually help if we created a function. That would be that would be of some use to someone, I imagine. So with our login, we need to change. So we need to actually get. So this part needs to change. So our username, our password, our error, and our DB all stay the same. But we now need to get a user from the database instead of checking the username explicitly. So we select star from user where username equals our username. And we just do a fetch one on that actually. Fetch one, so that will get our user. If we don't have a user, then the error equals incorrect username. We know they're not registered. And there needs to be a full stop at the end of that as well. If our password isn't correct, so we need to check our user password against our password. So this is basically checking the password hash of the currently stored password with the password that we've taken from the form. If that doesn't match, then we submit an error of incorrect password. Then you have if not error, then actually this is largely different. We do a session.clear. We're going to do a session user ID. Whoops. Equals user ID. And then we return a redirect of wherever you want. I'm just going to send us back to the index page just so we can see it. If there are still any errors, then we need to flash them. And then we need to redirect to login instead of register. So what we're doing here, just to kind of catch you up. So we're clearing the previous session of a previous user. We're then creating a new session with a new user ID in it. And then there are a few other things as well that I want to do before we run all this. So we need to do a logout as well. So we're going to have /logout. And this one's going to be very, very, very simple, thankfully. All we need to do is session.clear, so just clear the user. And return redirect URL for, and we're going to send them back to the login page. Just for the sake of it, and that's all we need to do. There are a few other helper functions as well, but I do want to show it running first. So if you kill the development server, run that again. Go back here. So if you then go to, this is really small. Sorry, I can't make this any better. Auth/login. Maybe register. I don't know why. Oh, that's right. I've forgotten to do the thing again. So every time you add something, you need to add it into your init. It doesn't just automatically work, as I apparently keep thinking it does. So we need to import auth, and we need to register our blueprint auth.bp. Once we've done that, and I'm going to restart the server just to make sure. Blueprint is no attribute logout. That's because I have done that badly, and that's supposed to be root, not logout. And then we need to rerun our server again. And it works. So this is partially, I'm not sure why these, I think these are doing wrong. But it won't look like this if you don't have the styles.css. That's kind of what's making this look a little bit nicer. So if you type in a user, just say, I'm going to have to burn most of those email addresses out. And if we say our password is memes, and we hit register, then we are registered. So it's redirected to our login page. And if we go back to our app, if I go into the app SQLite, we can see that we have one row, Carbra, and then this is the hash of our password. So, I don't know, God knows. Oh, it's a SHA-256. There we go. I'm not sure what this is all about at the start. Maybe it's just something to throw people off. But if we then do, say, Carbra, that's still going to bring up a load of email addresses I don't want you to see. And memes, then we get redirected to Hello World. Otherwise, if you get the password wrong, it'll come up here saying incorrect password. If we get the username wrong, it'll say incorrect username. If you go into register, if you just hit register, you'll get this error saying please fill in this field. So if you try and re-register as Carbra again, it'll say user Carbra is already taken. Please try another. That should probably be username, not user actually, but you get the idea. So while I'm here, I do want to show you two more things. So the first of which, I don't want to spend too long on this because this isn't a HTML tutorial, but I do want to show you these templates down the side. Editing me here, just butting in. I did actually do an explanation of these HTML templates, but looking back in the editing booth, I did a really bad job, so I'm just doing it again. So these HTML templates are obviously built on HTML, but they use something called Jinja templating. And Flask supports this by default. And they work in these blocks. So you can have a block, actually we'll come back to the blocks because it'll make a bit more sense, but you can have these like logic statements. So all these logic statements are placed within a curly bracket and a percentage sign, and then the same on the other side. And you can also have variables passed in as well. And these can be, passed in from Flask directly, or in this case, they're passed in using the for loop. So in the if loop, G is automatically available to all Jinja templates. So it just looks if g.user. So if we do have a user, then we display, this bit. Otherwise, then we display this. And then we have to do an end if block as well. And then the for loop, works in much the same way. So this get flash messages is always available as well. So this just gets all the messages that have been passed into the flash function, clears all of the flash messages, and then you can iterate through them. So in this case, you're doing a class flash, and then we are passing in a message. So you could do like an alert in the top corner or something if you wanted to do something like that. And then again, you have to do the end for. These blocks are useful if you have, say, the login page, where you have this block header, and you can see it extends base HTML, so it extends this, but it provides the blocks. So we have our block header. I'm not actually sure. Oh, that's down here. So our block header is our block title, which is login. So our title we've set to login. So the title will go into our tab title up here using the block. And then this is in a block header, which has the title in H1 tags. And then this will be inserted into here. So it is basically, it is a templating tool pretty much. And then we can have our block content as well, which is the content specifically for that page. And here we just put in the form, and then we put it just in a block here, and then this will go in here. And the same for the register. The register is basically the same, except instead of login, it's register, and that's literally the only difference between the two. So I'm going to hand back to past me to explain the rest of everything. The other thing I want to quickly show you before we go is some extra stuff that you can do for login sessions and stuff. So if we do bp.before app request def get logged in user, g.user. So this will actually get, okay, so this will be called before any request, and it will get any logged in user. So you remember somewhere up here, I think we were setting something or other. Oh no, yeah, we were setting a session user ID. Well, here we're actually going to be querying the database for that ID and setting it as the user to be used for the request. So if we do that with get db.execute select star from, we probably actually don't need to select star really, but it's whatever. User, well, actually, you know what? It's probably a good convention to just select the ID. Actually, it would just be the select ID, wouldn't it? Not user ID. Where ID equals that. User ID, that needs to be in brackets, and then a trailing comma, and then dot fetch 1. And then if user ID, which we're setting to session.get user ID, else none. So this is essentially getting the user ID from the session and assigning it to a variable called user ID. If this variable returns none, then we just return none out of this as there's no user logged in. However, if we do get a user ID, then we actually want to get the user from the database, and we can probably just do select star because we don't really need anything from it, where the user ID equals user ID. So we're getting a logged in user there. So that's incredibly useful. And this, you don't actually need to do anything other than that now. It will just automatically do that for you whenever you make a request. If a user is logged in, g.user will be available to you. We can also do login required. So this is a decorator. We pass in a view. And then we wraps the function and we pass view in. So this view is our callable that we're trying to decorate. So say, for example, if you wanted to put login required on the logout, for example. And then we have def wrapper quags. So this just works as a standard decorator. And we return view quags if g.user, else redirect URL for auth dot login. So what this is doing is it will make sure, actually we need to return the wrapper as well. So what this is doing is it's checking to see if g.user exists. If we do have a user logged in, then it will return the page as normal, as login is required. Otherwise, it will prompt the user to log in, which is pretty cool. So I think we've been here long enough. That is the basics of Flask development. Hopefully that makes sense. I know I didn't cover the HTML templates in too much detail, but chances are if you're building a website, you probably already know how to do at least some of that, but you can of course look it up. Otherwise, I just didn't want this video to be stupidly long because it's already going to be about half hour. Of course, if you like the video, then make sure to leave a like to let me know, and maybe subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. If you have any questions or things you want me to see in the future, then make sure to leave a comment in the section below. I read every single one, so your feedback is greatly appreciated. If you want to support this channel monetarily, you can do so one of two ways, by becoming either a member or a patron. £1 a month on either, and you can be on this screen like these people. And I will see you in the next video where we take our Flask app and we do some PyScript stuff with it. So PyScript released quote unquote properly quite recently. So I'm going to be showing you how to put some actual Python code, not only in the back end, but in the front end as well. So I'll see you for that.